All right, so we are diving into the start-stop method today, and we've got some really interesting source material that goes way beyond like just the basic how-to. It really gets into the why it works and like the science behind the pleasure.
Yeah, it is fascinating how much depth there is to this. We're not just skimming the surface here. This source really explores those subtle nuances that can totally elevate intimate experiences.
Okay, so right off the bat, the source talks about comfort and positioning. And I'll admit, I kind of like skimmed over that part at first, thinking like, okay, yeah, we get it, be comfy. But then I got to this tip about putting a pillow under the hips. And I was like, wait, hold on, there's a reason for that.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a reason. It's all about like optimizing the angle of the pelvis, to enhance nerve stimulation and blood flow. Even that slight lift can make a big difference in terms of sensation.
Huh. So it's not just about being comfortable, it's about being comfortable in a way that like maximizes the pleasure.
Exactly. And this source really pushes back against that whole idea of rushing things. He uses this analogy of savoring a delicious dessert. You don't just like inhale it, right? You take your time to appreciate each flavor and let it linger. And it's about applying that same principle to intimacy, allowing the arousal to build gradually.
I'm curious about this because sometimes that rush is part of the fun, right?
Yeah.
So what's the downside to skipping that slow buildup?
Well, if you rush, your body doesn't really have the time to fully respond to each sensation. The nervous system can actually get overwhelmed, and that can lead to tension instead of relaxation.
Oh, that makes sense.
And then psychologically rushing things can create like a sense of pressure or even performance anxiety.
And that's definitely not helpful.
Right. Not helpful at all.
So by starting slowly, you're essentially like setting the stage for a much more intense experience later on.
Absolutely. And, the source points out an area that a lot of people neglect in that initial buildup, the inner thighs.
The inner thighs.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever really focused on that area as part of foreplay?
Honestly, not really.
So the source talks about how sensitive that area is and suggests incorporating things like light kisses or gentle stimulation there. It's a way to awaken those nerve endings and create a cascade of pleasurable sensations throughout the body.
Okay, I'm definitely making a mental note of that. So comfort, positioning, and this slow teasing buildup, it's all about laying the groundwork.
As is such.
Now the source dives into the heart of the matter, the start-stop technique. And I gotta admit, the idea of stopping right when things are getting good always seemed kind of counterintuitive to me.
Right. I can see why you'd think that. But there's a really fascinating logic behind it. Imagine building a fire. You don't just throw a giant log on and expect it to go up in flames, right?
Right.
You carefully build it up, kindling and smaller pieces of wood, gradually increasing the intensity.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So the start-stop method applies that same principle to arousal. You bring someone close to climax, and then you ease off the stimulation. It's like fanning the flames of desire, creating this wave of anticipation that makes the eventual release even more explosive.
So you're teasing the senses, building up the tension, and then letting it release in a much more powerful way.
Exactly. And the source really stresses the importance of paying attention to your partner's physical cues during this process. Things like moans, changes in breathing, even trembling legs. Those are all signs that they're getting close.
So you're not just blindly following a set of instructions, you're being really attuned to how your partner is responding and adjusting your approach.
That's it. It's like a dance.
A dance of intimacy.
Exactly. And, the source even gives a great tip for maintaining that connection and building anticipation during those pauses. Whisper seductive phrases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a subtle way to keep the spark alive and enhance the emotional connection, especially in those moments of heightened arousal.
Okay, so we've got those whispers, the pauses, the attention to your partner's cues. It's all adding up to something way bigger than just a physical technique.
Yeah, this is about so much more than just the mechanics. What this source is really getting at is that the start-stop method is a framework for building intimacy and connection.
And that's what's been resonating with me throughout this whole deep dive. It's not just about learning steps, it's about understanding the deeper layers of pleasure and connection.
And, it goes even further than that. The source actually suggests that mastering this technique can have benefits that spill over into other areas of life.
Oh, really? Like what?
Like building confidence, cultivating patience, becoming more attuned to subtle cues in any interaction, really.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. It's like the skills you develop in the bedroom can actually enhance your communication and awareness in other aspects of your life.
Exactly. It's about being present, observant,
Mhm.
responsive to your partner's needs. Those are valuable skills no matter what kind of relationship you're in.
Yeah, totally. And the source also talks about the importance of aftercare.
Yes, it's not just about the main event. It's about those moments of connection and tenderness afterwards.
I've always thought of aftercare as just kind of cuddling and maybe some pillow talk. But this source seems to be framing it as something much more significant.
It's about showing your partner that you care about their well-being,
Mhm.
both physically and emotionally, allowing them to decompress at their own pace, offering reassurance, really reinforcing the bond you've created.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like the final chapter of a beautiful story, where you get to savor those lingering emotions and reflect on the journey you share together.
I love that analogy.
Mhm.
And the source also encourages open communication, even after the experience is over.
So it's not just during, it's after as well.
Right. It suggests things like asking for feedback, reflecting on what worked well, even exploring educational resources together.
Wow.
Yeah, to continuously grow and learn as a couple.
I love that idea. It's like saying, hey, we're in this together, and we're always striving to create the most amazing experiences for each other.
It takes the pressure off perfection
Mm.
and allows for that continuous exploration and growth.
So it's not about achieving some like mythical level of mastery. It's about embracing the journey of discovery and connection with your partner.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the philosophy and the psychology behind the start-stop method, but I'm curious to dive into some of the more specific techniques. The source mentions teasing as a key element. What exactly does that look like in practice?
Teasing is all about building that anticipation, creating a sense of longing. You can use your breath, feather-light touches, even whispered words, just to create that sense of almost but not quite.
I can see how that would really heighten the sensations.
It's all about the buildup.
Are there any specific examples from the source that stand out to you?
Well, it talks about using like a single fingertip to trace patterns on the skin, drawing attention to erogenous zones without directly stimulating them, or using your breath to create warm sensations along the neck and inner thighs.
Oh.
It's about being creative and playful with your touch, exploring different ways to create that anticipation and desire.
Those are great examples. It's making me realize just how much creativity and subtlety you can bring to intimacy. It's not just about going through the motions. It's about being fully present and engaged in every single moment.
Absolutely. And the source also emphasizes the importance of synchronizing your energy with your partners.
You know, I've heard that phrase before, synchronizing energy, but I've always struggled to really grasp what it means in practice.
Yeah, it can sound a little mystical,
It does.
but really it's about being attuned to your partner's rhythm, both physically and emotionally. So if they're moving their hips to meet your touch, match their tempo. If their breathing becomes shallow and erratic, slow down and give them space to savor the sensations. It's about mirroring their energy and creating that sense of shared momentum.
So it's less about following a script and more about being really responsive to their cues.
Yes.
Creating a dance where you're both leading and following at the same time.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Okay, so we've got the teasing, the synchronizing, the pauses, the aftercare. It's all about creating this multi-layered experience that goes way beyond just the physical act itself.
Exactly. And that's what this source is advocating for. A holistic approach to intimacy that encompasses the physical, emotional, and even spiritual dimensions of connection.
You know, this deep dive is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about the start-stop method. It's so much more than just a technique. It's like a whole philosophy of intimacy, a way of approaching pleasure with intention and awareness.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. And remember, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. The source also delves into some even more advanced techniques and variations that can take things to another level.
Oh, I'm all ears. What kind of things are you talking about?
Well, it talks about incorporating sensory play, experimenting with different positions, even using toys and other tools to add new dimensions of pleasure.
Okay, now that sounds intriguing.
And we will definitely get into all of that. But before we dive into those more advanced techniques, let's take a moment to recap what we've learned so far, and then we'll jump right back in.
All right, so let's get into those advanced techniques. Like, how do we actually take this start-stop method to the next level?
You know, the source really emphasizes that advanced doesn't have to mean more complicated. It's really more about kind of expanding your toolkit and finding what works for you and your partner.
Okay, so what are some of the tools that we can add to that toolkit?
Well, one area the source explores is sensory play. So thinking beyond just touch. What about incorporating things like temperature or texture, even scent?
Okay, give me an example.
So imagine using something like a silk scarf That smooth, cool sensation against the skin can be incredibly stimulating, especially when you contrast it with the warmth of your breath or your touch,
Something like that.
or even something as simple as an ice cube. Tracing it along erogenous zones, that sudden shift in temperature can really awaken the senses.
It's like you're turning intimacy into this art form.
Exactly. And it's not just about adding new sensations, it's also about enhancing the ones you already have. The source actually mentions experimenting with flavored lubricants.
Flavored lubricants. Okay, that's not something I've ever really considered.
I know it might sound a little out there,
Yeah.
but think about how much taste can enhance any sensory experience. Just a hint of sweetness or touch of spice, it can add a whole new dimension to the way you experience pleasure.
That's an interesting way to think about it. It's like taking a familiar dish and adding a surprising new ingredient to really elevate the flavor.
Exactly. And the source also encourages exploring different positions, not just for variety, but because different angles and configurations can actually create new and more intense sensations.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that. Sometimes even a slight shift in position can make a huge difference.
It's all about understanding how the body moves and responds to stimulation. Experimenting with positions can be a really fun way to discover new erogenous zones and find those sweet spots that really make you both go, wow.
This whole conversation has really highlighted for me the importance of communication and exploration. Like, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not willing to talk to your partner and experiment together, you're really missing out.
Absolutely. The source is all about open communication, a willingness to try new things, and a shared sense of adventure.
It's about creating that safe and playful space where you both feel comfortable expressing yourselves.
Exactly. And remember, this is an ongoing journey. There's always something new to learn, something new to try, something new to discover about yourself and your partner.
It takes the pressure off having to get it right, and it just encourages you to embrace the process of learning and growing together.
And that's what this deep dive has really been all about, going beyond the surface level, understanding the why behind the how, and empowering you to create those truly remarkable experiences.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I'm walking away with a whole new understanding of the start-stop method, not just as a technique, but as a whole philosophy of intimacy.
And that's what we hope to achieve with these deep dives, to spark your curiosity, to challenge your assumptions, and to leave you with insights that you can actually apply to your own life and relationships.
So as we wrap up our exploration of the start-stop method, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
For me, it's that pleasure is a journey, not a destination. It's about savoring each moment, exploring with curiosity, and continuously seeking ways to deepen your connection with your partner.
Beautifully said. And remember, listeners, this is just the beginning of your own exploration. Take what you've learned today and make it your own. Experiment, communicate, and above all, have fun.